I was making a thumbnail for my video for Rise of Ronin and its sales. Somebody had told me that the game sold very well and all of this stuff. And as I was listening to something, this video from Colin Moriarty just popped up on my feed. I listened to the very first few seconds and I said to myself, I wonder what gaming company has their thumb on the pulse of this particular area that PlayStation is about to get raked over the coals in.
Much is being made about the PlayStation brand's games as a service meltdown, reasonably and understandably so. How could Sony botch this initiative so badly, so publicly, so completely? But I think something really important is being buried in this story.
How can Sony botch this initiative so badly, so poorly? Well, they've refused to be malleable. They have a stiff-necked approach in a sense, and you need to be fluid in a market that's changing, saturated, and brutal. You cannot take your old ways and think the market's going to bend for you. That's not going to happen. So first of all, I'll say this. Exclusivity is killing PlayStation by itself. It's insane, but it's a reality. You bring out a video game and you negate other audience members that can potentially drive revenue for you or drive customers for you, or basically in some cases, if your game launches on a bad foot, save your game. And you expect to make success in this kind of industry that's already saturated with similar kinds of games that are established and better, okay, I guess the results will speak for themselves.
Overlooked at best, or talked down at worst. And that's that, regardless of the failure and execution, going after games as a service success is a good thing, actually.
Okay, so going after games as a service success is a good thing. So in this regard, we now have to go ahead and point out that the competitor who has done this quite successfully, by the way, in many iterations of their games, who's also revamping their games to basically go ahead and witness this kind of a possibility of a success, is doing the right thing. That's Xbox. Xbox taking its games that have already established player base like Forza Horizon 5, with over 40 million people having played it, right? And trying to take it to PlayStation to go ahead and give it another jolt of life, taking Age of Mythology, Age of Empires, having Call of Duty on there, having a game like Minecraft on there, and Overwatch 2, has done the right thing or the good thing for their business, not just once, but at least 12 times. I remember when the first time I ever responded to a Colin Moriarty clip, he said, this generation, Xbox didn't even show up. I remember very clearly. He said, if anybody can explain it to me, please do. And I always like to point out, whenever somebody who may be pro PlayStation or have an affinity to PlayStation says something, I try to say, I hope you're realizing that you're setting a standard that Xbox is probably excelling in, or you're following exactly what Xbox has already set at a standard, and you once maybe called it a bad thing or called it insufficient, but now you realize that the market could not be bothered about opinions that we speak from our own microphones, but is only bothered in who's going to survive its brutal and callous barrage.
Trying to make multiple winners in the space is smart, actually. Mid and long-term monetary success absolutely runs through these games, actually. And if you care about PlayStation's long-term health, you better not ignore the necessity of succeeding outside of the AAA single-player realm. Find success or die trying. Those are
Find success or die trying. Xbox Studios. They found what they needed. We've been looking very carefully at these different video game studios. Even when Xbox was getting bludgeoned in console sales, these studios stayed open. This is before the acquisition of Bethesda. These studios, they stayed on their feet. How? How did they do it? Steam. Let me walk y'all through this stuff. Come on now. Let's go. Steam. They were launching their games on Steam. Instead of sticking with the exclusivity paradigm, they were able to make good on bringing games out here. Flight Simulator. Well, that's always been a PC thing, right? Sea of Thieves, Halo, Forza. All these games, little tiny titles, grounded, finding sustainable ways to stay. Guys, I made the video about, I can't remember their names, the ones that made Godfall. I just saw again on Twitter, Crytek has halted the development of Crysis 4 and is laying off, I think, 15% of their staff. Remedy is finally just breaking even in their Alan Wake 2 game. This is not the market for you to be messing around. This is the market for you to basically bend your neck and execute upon. And I'm saying this, and you may think, okay, I'm responding to somebody who's just a PlayStation fanboy and all that. No, 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 no. This is an indictment to the Xbox fans who were actually against this particular paradigm and this strategy. In fact, in this video, I think I agree with Colin Moriarty more than ever, because I've always said this. It's a weird conundrum, because live service games, we know that they can be crappy. But from a business perspective, if you want to drive single player games, you actually got to go that live service route to be able to get that revenue. It's just a reality.
Are the only two directions to go in. If you're blissfully unaware of what I'm even talking about, lucky you, let me catch you up. Sony, PlayStation's megalithic Japanese parent company, is heavily reliant on the PlayStation brand to drive revenue and profit alike. To illustrate the point, merely look at Sony's Q2 2024 financials, released in November of last year, just a few months ago. PlayStation, known internally as the Games and Network Services silo, accounted for more revenue than Sony's behemoth music and movies and television divisions combined, with plenty of room to spare. PlayStation's operating income is likewise substantially larger than any other part of Sony. We won't get into the deep financial weeds any further here, other than to say that it's vitally important to Sony that PlayStation doesn't just operate well, but continues to extract maximal value.
If they want to do that, they have to change their paradigm. Just because they have massive revenues, we got to see when Tweaktown was actually showing the different operational margins in the FTC trial, that their margin was actually smaller than Nintendo, seeing as they basically blow through chunks and chunks of funds because they're not as profitable as they could possibly be. I've always argued that they need to add PC to their ecosystem, which they already are doing, but the Concord approach versus the possible Marathon approach is going to yield two different results, because Marathon is going on Xbox, and you cannot put aside even 1 million players for a live service games as a service game. That 1 million players could be the difference between your studio staying alive or going away. Xbox has farmed millions of players off of PlayStation. Why PlayStation is sitting aside thinking that they have some level of superiority that wouldn't allow for them to cross boundaries is funny to me, when they're benefiting from games like MLB The Show and Death Stranding and Predator Hunting Grounds, which are all now on Xbox. Games that were actually, in a sense, coordinated in its development by PlayStation. Weird stuff.
Should that begin to slip, the cascading effect around the company could be drastic. Hell, now retired ex-Sony exec Shuhei Yoshida recounted on a recent podcast that PlayStation 3's initial failure and the substantial financial losses Sony incurred because of it
was covered by their TV brand. Yeah, their TV brand did cover it, but I want to hear what Colin has to say.
Have shut the entire brand down completely, and it was only Sony's TV manufacturing that helped stem the bleeding.
When I was talking with Ken, and Ken explained the business model of sales processor, he said we're gonna build as big a new business outside the video game. Otherwise, we won't be able to recoup the investment. So I thought, we would be over. We are.
One thing comes to mind with Shuhei Yoshida's interview, and I know Colin is trying to ensure that he cites and make sure the source plays, and my video is already at 8 minutes, and I want to go ahead and just stop it, because again, I think this intro, I'd like to at least hear the intro. Is Shuhei Yoshida's comments in this kind of funny interview was very telling. When he said something about the remasters and the remakes, I laughed so hard because I said to myself, why would you go ahead and spend money remastering and remaking the same game to sell to the same customer base when you could just find a new audience with the exact same game and actually doing a port, which would more than likely be cheaper and possibly yield better gains? Because you create excitement for that game again and create awareness for that game again in a new marketing cycle. And now that particular franchise has access to sequels that it's introduced to other folk out there, just like they're doing with PC. But PlayStation has a fundamental strategy to try to push Xbox out of the business, which is very, very weird for them because they're not in a position to do that. In fact, what they've basically, created is a Trojan horse out of Xbox, who is now pretty much sucking attention out of their ecosystem, and the potential for them to be able to launch a successful live service game is now basically barred by Xbox's own games, who have basically some of the biggest titles in the live service category thriving on the PlayStation platform. It's kind of weird though, right? That all of their efforts basically led to this paradigm that we see ourselves in.
Over.
Remember, Sony isn't Microsoft, nor is it Nintendo. Xbox was arguably Microsoft's least important internal silo for many years, with the division's P&L largely irrelevant to the larger corporate entity, at least until they bought Activision and went all in as a third-party games publisher. While Nintendo...
I don't think so. Well, Activision, but to be the least, I'm not certain. Perhaps, maybe like, yeah, okay, yeah, I see what he's saying. I see what he's saying.
Nintendo is a games company, full stop. In this regard, Sony's a bit of a unique entity, a one-time electronics company that wisely invested in content beginning in the late 80s, as it gobbled up the likes of CBS Records and Columbia Pictures and solidified Sony as something other than a gizmo manufacturer first. Their instincts here were very good.
Very good. Very good.
So all of that brings us to today. PlayStation is humming along, PlayStation 5 is selling extremely well, even outpacing the meteorically popular PlayStation 4 in time-adjusted unit sales in these United States, the biggest core gaming market in the world by a mile. Hell, tens of millions of people still play on PS4 around the world too, a machine that's entering its 12th year, and which is still manufactured, all while Sony laps its competition in entering emerging markets like China, India, and Africa, where plenty of fruit will be born. But an enormous tension has developed on the market, all revolving around how people choose to play games and how they choose to spend their money. Now,
how people choose to play games and spend their money. He said Africa, and I am from Africa, and I can tell you easily, soccer games rule. I mean, I doubt people will not, because number one, again, knowing the economic, structure of my nation as an African nation, and even speaking with friends from other African nations, you have a very limited amount of funds to buy games. Like, you probably buy one game in a number of years, or your friends will buy another iteration of the game, and many Nigerians will buy and play a soccer game. That's it. Like, they're just not going to bother with, like, if PlayStation wants to enter those markets, sure, enter with hardware, because PlayStation is the brand growing up. Some people on the channel talk about me and Xbox like, I'm older than some of the kids here. I mean, I'm not that old, but some of the cats here, and I played PlayStation all my life growing up, even if I didn't even own one. I used to go to the arcades because our parents couldn't afford the darn thing. And in the arcades were PlayStations. Not necessarily arcade machines. Those were even expensive. They were PlayStations. So what they did was the arcade business model got cut down into a console business model and then given the name the arcade or the gaming lounge or the game center. And we'd go in there and we'd play soccer games on PlayStation 1s and PlayStation 2s. And in fact, and that was basically growing up. So again, PlayStation, yes, it's permeated in those regions, but what games are they playing? Like in Pakistan? What is he going to go offer them? Do you even know? Do you all even know the game of Pakistan? Do you all know the national game of Pakistan? It's Tekken. Pakistan is one of the, if not the GOAT of Tekken, which is crazy. They were a sleeper country all these years and people discovered them. So again, software and content is where the money is. Sell all the hardware in the world you want, but software is where the money is. Everyone that's making good amounts of software, decent amount of software, rebooting their software is thriving if they make it available for others. That's where PlayStation's business model and its stiff-neck iron grasp on the market seems to be lacking, in my humble opinion.
Now, make no mistake, Sony is making staggeringly more money per user on a PlayStation console than they ever have, as illustrated by the remarkable fact that through fiscal year 2023, so more than a year ago on the calendar, PlayStation had made twice as much profit from PS5 alone than it did during the entire PS1 and PS2 generations combined. Let me repeat that. In a 4-year period on PlayStation 5, Sony netted an operating income of $10 billion from running their ecosystem. From the end of calendar year 1994, when PS1 launched in Japan, through calendar year 2005, the last year of PlayStation 2 being the marquee console in the PlayStation lineup, Sony made $5 billion in cumulative operating income from gaming over a decade. Sony is doing better with 70 million PS5s on the front line than it was with more than 100 million deployed PS4s, not to mention 150 million PS2s or 100 million PS1s, again combined.
However, it's still closing studios, and it's not unique. Steam does 10 bill like every year or something like that. Again, I'm not trying to downplay or downgrade. I'm trying to point out that PlayStation's business is way too expensive for its current strategy without it having to bend its neck. He's about to show Helldivers 2. What carried this game? The PC market. The moment it was willing to basically be flexible, it saw success. That is where the difference is. You see that?
But it's how that money is filtering through to them that was undoubtedly eye-opening and forced them to make a really wise decision, which is to pursue that source of income more aggressively. Again, let's not mix up the wisdom in the decision from the execution of that decision, and don't fall prey to the idea that console gaming is dying. It isn't. Back in the day, a la carte game sales were all that really mattered, along with some odds and ends that helped round things out, accessories like memory cards and extra controllers, licensing for things like strategy guides and toys and so on. And all around, costs were dramatically lower. As my friend David Jaffe told me on one of our many episodes of Sacred Symbols Plus, he and his small team made the original Twisted Metal on PS1 for less than $500,000, and it went on to sell a couple million copies to date. That's pure profit. Multiply that by Sony's aggressive second and third party publishing initiatives during the latter half of the 90s and through the PS2 era, and you can see how money was made and everyone stayed fed. But fast forward to today, where Sony is perhaps best known for its marquee AAA first party single player games. A lone high-end member of a first party team on some of these games will cost in a year what it cost to create the original Twisted Metal full stop. And yeah, you won't sell.
You hear that? Did you all hear that? Did you all hear that? This is why when this game, Spider-Man 2, Marvel Spider-Man 2, when we saw the leaks from Insomniac, we saw that PlayStation was putting pressure on its studios to lay off folk. Because the expenses are insane. They've burned and made all this money that Colin alluded to just a minute ago in this video. But the cost to get there is just way too high. And leading with console sales, which is pretty much very minuscule in its own, profit generation compared to software, doesn't seem to be the appropriate strategy. That's why PlayStation decided we're going to go to PC. And PC they did go to, and the investment worked out for them. Their games may be, wishy-washy in terms of sales on console, but on PC, they do see some success.
A couple million or so, like the original Twisted Metal, you might sell, say, 10 million copies of Spider-Man 2 at full price in just a few months. That's awesome, of course. 10 million copies at $70 a pop nets you an enormous $700 million in gross revenue, bolstered by Sony not having to split its storefront fees with anyone. But then you realize the game cost well over $300 million to make, some 700 times the original Twisted Metal's development cost. Yet Spider-Man 2, unadjusted for inflation, cost a mere $20 more. Adjust the values for inflation, and Twisted Metal was considerably more expensive at the point of sale relative to time. And the brand Spider-Man 2 was built around was licensed, eating a low 9 figures from the total. And you had to aggressively market it too, which likely cost another low 9 figures. The point is, before you know it, Sony might have made $100 million in profit on Spider-Man 2 if they're lucky. And yes, that's a lot of money to me and you. That's even a lot of money to some mid-tier publishers who would die for those numbers. But to a company like Sony, not really. Not when you...
The man is speaking truth. This is crazy. If PlayStation is not dissected to show the reality, PlayStation cannot improve. I've said this all the while. What have I not? I cannot imagine what I have not said in multiple videos that he's saying in this particular video. The problem that I think these PlayStation fans now have is that I make too many videos. Well, because y'all won't listen. That's why. Repetition is going to basically be your memory aid, and I'm going to make sure that we drive it into your thick skulls. That you are touting this business that is basically shooting itself in the foot in a market that cannot be, in a sense, that cannot condone such business practices. Sure, I don't like exclusivity. I get it. But you can't just go ahead and say, well, he doesn't like exclusivity. Look at my arguments. Look at my position. Look at the data. Look at the market and make a decision for yourself rather than one that's spoon-fed to you.
Bet so much time and money, not when the opportunity cost is so staggering. They made the same amount of profit on Twisted Metal in 1995 that they did on Spider-Man 2 in 2023, but they bet so much more on one than the other. One took less than a calendar year to make, the other took more than 5 years. One had a development team of perhaps a dozen, the other hundreds, with untold hundreds more working on it in a support and contract capacity. The economic tension here is obvious to anyone with a functioning brain.
Not to a lot of our fellow PlayStation fans, Colin. No, no, no. I can attest that there is vitriol when you say the truth like this in these scenarios and in these situations. I had to block 3 people yesterday. They all were personally going after me like, oh, you're a sad person. Why do you make these videos about PlayStation? Yabba dibba libba do. There's some of them that are just obsessed with the channel. They saw me make a comment on another video and they were all over my case. Because what's going on here is this. Fanboyism never considered the market. And so now a lot of these folk have been reinforced with bad ideas. It's hard for anybody to now come in and tell them the truth. And they were listening to the likes of your podcast and the likes of other podcasts that hailed PlayStation as this grand beacon of gaming, whatever, when the market was sitting there going, who is PlayStation? Who? And now everybody wants to backtrack and everybody wants to come out and now give the reality. You've conditioned them. I'm not saying you specifically, but I've listened to some of the things you've said in the past about PlayStation. Perhaps we could say it's based on the knowledge that we had at the time, but you've conditioned them.
There has to be other avenues to make money on games, right? So what does Sony do? Well, the powers that be undoubtedly saw where the money was largely flowing into their coffers from. And let's be clear, it's not from their single-player games, nor is it from many other companies' single-player games either. You can't release a handful of first and second-party games a year, make no more than low 9 figures in profit on each, and make 2 and 2 equal 4. No, the profit is categorically and decisively coming from games as a service.
What have I said? What have I said? What have I been saying on the Video Game Fight School channel for at least going on over a year, pushing 2 years? I've been incessantly, unrelentingly showing data every single time I pop this particular recording device on. I bring receipts to the forefront. 52 minutes ago, and less than an hour ago, fresh off the oven, Matt Piscatella, Circana US Player Engagement Tracker, top 15 titles by total weekly US players not concurrent, February 1st, 2025. Call of Duty HQ retakes #1 on PlayStation 5. Sniper Elite Resistance debuts on the Xbox Series at 8th. No Man's Sky jumps from 95th to number 12th on Steam. Look at PlayStation's itinerary. Look at Xbox's itinerary in terms of what gamers are playing. Ladies and gentlemen, why have we been fooling ourselves all this while? Some of you are saying VG is a grifter. VG is cringe. No, you're cringe. Anyone who ignores the truth is absolutely the cringiest person you could ever meet, because you could tell them, hey man, you're bleeding from your femoral artery. And they'd be like, nah, I don't believe that I am. When the truth is they could be bleeding. It's cringe. It's right here in front of you. It's right here in front of you. Before you know what's going on, Ragnarok is going to disappear from this list. Before you know, Ninja Gaiden Black is going to disappear from this list. Because again, another live service game is going to come in here and it's going to push these things down before anybody can see something. In fact, you're better off on making a game that will resonate with PC players, which is insane because there just seems to be like, what is this PC conversation? No Man's Sky? PC players kind of are different in most of the games that they play. PlayStation's got to learn a lot. Oh, man.
Continuous support of older and newer products alike, from which Sony passively sits back and receives 30% of every transaction without lifting a finger. It's a pretty sweet position to be in, no doubt. Sony sells you a console, maybe breaks even or makes a few bucks on top, supports its digital ecosystem, which you pay a nominal annual fee to use, and then, because you're a gigantic nerd, you purchase hundreds of dollars of, say, Fortnite skins over the course of a couple of years. Sony invested virtually nothing in you in terms of content, but you're feeding them 30% rips. And yeah, they're happy when they get their 30% of a single-player game, sure, that's awesome too, and it's 100% if it's first or second party. But that's a one-time thing, maybe executed by an average player only a few times a year at most.
He's saying this, right? And I see a lot of PlayStation players say this. But many of them don't realize that 70% is actually better. Here is a cost comparison, a revenue comparison of 30 to 70% of, say, 180 million units sold, or I guess I would say 150 million units sold of Call of Duty at full price. Look at the comparison. Xbox's revenue from PlayStation is going to be, in this particular case, $630 million. PlayStation's cut is going to be $270 million. The ratio is not the same. I guarantee you that PlayStation would love to be in Xbox's position in this transaction. Anybody would want that. What's crazier is Xbox then not only takes that 30% from that 70% from PlayStation, it gets 100% from its own coffers. Then it gets its 30% from Steam, and then possibly any other, platform like Xbox on PC, where it also gets its 100% and also gets subscription revenues for its own games. This is why PlayStation said our pillars are dated and behind the competition. They need ways to make money, and Xbox has found the way to just keep making more money than them. Because I can almost guarantee you, Colin's about to say, even though this 30% is all fine and well, 100% will kind of be nice. Listen.
Not everyone is me, spending a couple $1,000s a year on single-player fare. If you were like me, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. But attach rate is no longer the telling statistic, especially with games so quickly, regularly, and steeply discounted after launch, but rather user engagement, daily, weekly, and monthly active users, ongoing subscriptions like PlayStation Plus, and the unavoidable Fortnites, Apex Legends, Marvel Rivals, and whatever else is of the world. Sony execs look at that 30% they receive from this passively, and they wonder, what if we became more active? This is where I want
I'm out. I'm good. Hey, at this point in time, it should be left unsaid, and I can say thank God that people are waking up to the reality. Yes, this is it. This is why I came here. I said I'm gonna beat it into their heads until they start getting the memo. And at first, it seemed like I was crazy, right? Everybody was telling me you're cringe. Your channel doesn't have this much subs. I had people attacking the subscriber count of the channel. I'm like, guys, if we want to do subscriber counts, I got subscribers on my other channel. I abandoned that channel for the meantime to come and make sure that this thing was known. Sub count does not mean jack squat. Okay? If sub count was in a sense tied to the way you see things, I guarantee you many of the biggest channels and the biggest influencers in the world are probably not going to be where they are. This is not about a popularity contest. This is about the truth of what's going on in the gaming industry.
to make the case, as I already have, that the entire impetus behind their failed games as a service initiative is actually rock solid.
Yeah, I think we're good here, guys. I mean, I don't think there's much that I need to say anymore. Perhaps if I would make a second, piece in terms of part 2 of the video, then, maybe. But I think he said it all. PlayStation has got work to do. PlayStation has got to move into that. All these people say, well, they make 30% just sitting free and clear. For their biggest division in their company should just sit there and be making 30% and waiting for everybody else to go make a live service game, while they're over there blowing all this money for single player games that you all claim are quality single player games, but it's only limited to you buying one copy and then you're done, or buying it discounted. Third-party exclusive developers are running away. They're like, nah, bro, we're hoping, according to the Stellar Blade developers, that our game sells more on PC. That's when you know you're cooked. Thanks for watching the video, people. Meet me in the comment section if you have anything that you want to add. Peace out.